Good afternoon, everyone. We are together for our Erev Shabbat, Henry and Lisa Manusheri Parsha Shir, conducted by Rabbi Akiva Zweig, Rosh Yeshiva at the Talmudic University of Florida. Today, the rabbi is going to be discussing Parshas Ve'et Hanan, also ahead of Shabbat Nachamu. The topics will be learning to love and the conviction to speak, as well as to catalyze a spiritual renaissance. The month of Av is sponsored by Jaime and Donna Gutman in honor of the entire Zweig family and in appreciation of their dedication to our local and national Jewish community and their dissemination of authentic Torah learning. This week's class is also dedicated for a Refuah Shalem, a complete healing, for Yehoshua Yisrael, Ben Sima, and all Holei Yisrael, all of the ill among Israel. Without further ado, Rabbi Akiva Zweig.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to be sharing Torah again on Erev Shabbos. It's such a wonderful way to bring in Shabbos and to learn the Parsha. And as we have been experiencing, the way that the Torah teaches us just what we need to know at the time that we need to know it is something truly spectacular. So a little story that we'll begin with this week that I just posted about on our chat. The sponsor of our Friday Shir, our annual sponsor, is Henry and Lisa Manusheri and family. And this past week, he was asked to participate in a panel on anti-Semitism and to moderate that panel. And unfortunately, I was not able to join him. Dr. Finkelstein was not able to join him, but God willing in the future. But Henry did ask me for some talking points, and he shared with me, and he wanted me to share with the group the paragraph that I just posted to our chat. Hi, on the plane heading back to LA. So he will not be participating in our share today. I just received this a little bit ago. I just completed listening to your share from Wednesday. It was fantastic. Many of my talking points as I moderated on the anti-Semitism panel 2 days ago, and the other 2 times I spoke in focus groups, had similar context to what you were teaching. The crowd was fired up, inspired, and thanked me for being brave and passionate in delivering the message. It was truly a Kiddush Hashem. It is amazing how many billionaires and super successful people have such empty spiritual lives. Shabbat Shalom and all the best. So I wanted to share that not only because Henry asked me to share it, but also because the topic for today, in addition to learning to love, is the conviction to speak. And we see how critically important it is for our Jewish people, those of us that participate in Torah learning and classes and are really digging deep into the Torah. It builds an inspiration and it gives us the frame of mind, the ideas, and the ability to articulate meaningful and inspiring messages. And I'm encouraging everyone here to do the same. And we're going to talk a little bit again today about how to get to that place that we feel the conviction to speak. And we're going to talk about a sort of continuation of some of the classes that we've been doing recently about Moshe Rabbeinu and what maybe he could have done better, it seems, and of course the Jewish people and what they could have done better. And so we're going to talk about learning to love, the conviction to speak, and to catalyze a spiritual renaissance. That last part of the title, to catalyze a spiritual renaissance, we're going to be proposing today is going to depend very much on the types of classes that we're doing. It's a sentence that Dr. Rothman quoted to me today before we started quoted to me on Wednesday before we started our Wednesday morning shir about being in exile and seeking Hashem. So that's how we're going to go about our topics today. Now, in order to get to there, I would like to just frame for us the Parsha. The beginning of the Parsha talks very much about how Moshe Rabbeinu was davening to be let into Eretz Yisrael, but was rebuffed. Hashem rejected his request. And then the Torah goes into how the Jewish people need to know that Hashem is the one that takes care of us, and that the Torah that he gave to us gives us the recognition among the nations of the world that we're a wise and discerning people. But Moshe goes on to be very careful to warn us. We have to be extremely careful that everything that we saw and experienced, we need to inform it to the next generations, and we should never remove it from our hearts. And specifically, Mount Sinai, the day that we stood at Chorev, when Hashem taught to us the Torah, and there was this incredible revelation by Hashem, a fire, and just, unbelievable to hear the voice of Hashem amidst the fire. And we need to be very careful not to forget any of that. If we're living in Eretz Yisrael, which, as we've pointed out, is the Tisha B'Av reading, and we're there a long time, and we become old in the land, and we do destructive things, we will be exiled. And we're going to be scattered among the nations of the world, and we're going to seek God from that exile. That's chapter 4, sentence 29. And you will seek from there Hashem, and you will find Hashem when you seek him sincerely with all of your soul. And then the Torah goes on to say the way that Hashem has taken care of us in the past, and we have to know that Hashem is the Elohim, and that Hashem loves our forefathers, and he chose us, and we need to know and put into our heart that Hashem is the God in the heaven above and over the earth below. There is no other, and we need to guard all of his commandments. And then Moshe set up 3 cities of refuge. Talk about a seemingly strange segue. And then Moshe set up 3 cities of refuge on the east side of the Jordan, so that any accidental murderers could escape to there with their life and live there in exile. And then we go back, so to speak, to the topic where Moshe goes back to telling the people to learn all the commandments, and Hashem made the covenant with us in Mount Sinai, and that Hashem spoke to us face to face, and then he repeats the 10 commandments that we received in Mount Sinai. Then we have a long paragraph where Moshe Rabbeinu says, look, all these words, the 10 commandments you heard, this is chapter 5, sentence 19 through chapter 6, sentence 3, and then we get to the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So what is the long paragraph, part of the 10 commandments discussion that leads into Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? You guys came to me, all your leaders and elders, after you heard the voice amidst the darkness and the mountain that was flaming with fire. You all came close to me, the heads of your tribes and your elders, and you said, look, we saw Hashem, his glory, his greatness, and we heard his voice amidst the fire. We saw that Hashem can speak to a person, that a person can live. But now, why should we die? Because if God continues to speak to us, we'll be consumed by this fire. If we continue to hear directly from Hashem, we're going to die. Who is a person, a flesh and blood person, that can hear the voice of the living God speaking from amidst the fire like us and continue to live? Okay, it happened once. It can't continue, is what the people are saying. You, Moshe Rabbeinu, you go close and listen to everything that Hashem says. And you, Moshe Rabbeinu, you tell it to us. And Rashi points out, when the people say, and you come and speak to us, they use a female pronoun instead of a male pronoun. So instead of saying the ata and you, Moshe the male, come speak to us, they say the at and you, the female, Moshe, so to speak, you speak to us. So Rashi says, why are they calling Moshe a female? So Rashi says, it's not that they called Moshe a female, but Moshe was reflecting that he felt weak, that he had become weakened. Instead of the strength of a male, he felt like he had weakened himself like a female, because when they said to him that Hashem should speak to Moshe, and that Moshe should then relay that speaking to the people, Moshe Rabbeinu became very dejected and weakened from that request. He says, because I perceived that you were not truly pursuing passionately to come close to Hashem from love. You didn't really want that loving relationship with Hashem, because if you would have wanted it, How could it be better to learn from me, Moshe, instead of directly from Hashem? That's where Rashi's comment is, noticing the strange change in language that the male ata is instead va'at, and you, Moshe Rabbeinu, should speak to Hashem and then come. So you know what? Hashem says, look, do good with all that which they said, because all I really want is that they should have awe for me and keep the commandments in order that it could be good for them. That's all I want, is that it should be good for them. As long as they listen to the commandments, everything is good. Go tell them, go back to your tents, which means go back to full marriage because they had separated at Mount Sinai. This is, again, a conversation right after Mount Sinai. Go back to your tents. But you, Moshe, need to stand with Hashem, which is why Moshe does not go back to his tent, meaning Moshe does not go back to a wife. And I'll tell you everything, and you'll tell it to them, and then they guard everything, and that'll be just wonderful, and everybody should listen and keep and do everything that Hashem said in the land that Hashem gives them to inherit. That's the long paragraph right before Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And that's basically what I wanted to share about setting up the parsha. We're not going to go into the end of the parsha right now, although, of course, everything is very important. So first of all, what's this idea that Moshe became weak? He became weak? Okay, so the people, he was disappointed in them. They should have asked, instead of, hey, look, Moshe, you talk to us after you speak to Hashem and you be the go-between. They should have requested, or they should have just gone with the notion, okay, they experienced this revelation by Hashem and they could look forward to more of it. So that's question number one, is what exactly is it that Moshe became weak about? And related to that, of course, is why doesn't Moshe talk them out of it? If he's not happy with that, and if the people should have, in fact, give me 1 second, so I want to make sure we don't get interrupted. If the people should have, in fact, been willing to talk to Hashem and receive more direct prophecy from Hashem, so Moshe Rabbeinu should say to them, listen, this isn't a one-time thing. You guys have the opportunity to learn from Hashem directly, which is just the most amazing thing possible, and go ahead. But instead, Hashem tells Moshe, look, I heard what they said, and okay, fine, we'll do what they want, and you're going to be the go-between. So that's question number one. Question number two is, okay, why in fact were the people not wanting this closeness? Right? It's a legitimate point. One would have thought that the people would want that. Now you could say, well, they were very scared, and especially if you add in the teachings of the rabbis, that at Mount Sinai their souls left their body, but at the end of the day they came back to life. And so hopefully, that experience would have strengthened them and been ready for more in the future. Why did they not want it? Question number three is, why is Hashem, so to speak, okay with it? Hashem is saying, okay, Moshe Rabbeinu, do what they say, make it good what they want. They don't want to have me continue to speak to them directly. Go ahead, tell them, go back to your tents, and I'm going to speak through you, Moshe Rabbeinu. Why is Hashem, so to speak, okay with that? You would at least think that this is a conversation worth having, a discussion to go back and forth. And then, why is this the way? Because all of this information and this conversation is a very elaborate, kind of detailed expression that the Torah is giving right before we get to Shema Yisrael. If you look back in Parshas Yisro, we have very similar but much shorter information, which is said when the people after Mount Sinai. This is in Parshas Yisro, chapter 20, sentence 16. They said to Moshe, you speak and we will hear. Hashem should not speak anymore lest we die. It's one sentence. And Moshe says to them, that's okay. Hashem came to test you. And basically that's okay. It's like two sentences. And over here we have literally 15 sentences. What exactly is the elaboration here that the Torah is telling us? And we don't, for example, in Parshas Yisro learn that Moshe was dejected and he felt weakened by their request. We don't learn that. And why is this the appropriate introduction to Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? Because it's right next to it in the Torah. So what I'd like to do is to begin to answer these questions, to talk a little bit about love and just say one very simple idea first. It's very common in a loving relationship where people do feel love for each other, for one person to make a request and for the other person to feel uncomfortable with that request. That's very, very common for one reason or another. And I don't think I need to give examples. I think we could all think of examples. One person in the relationship wants something and they ask for something. The other person is not comfortable with it. And really, there are two ways to deal with that situation. When Hashem hears this request that the people are saying, look, you know what? We don't want to speak to Hashem directly. You, Moshe Rabbeinu, be the go-between. Moshe immediately says, okay. Hashem, says to Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, tell them that'll be fine, and you, Moshe Rabbeinu, will speak, and they can go back to their tents. Hashem could have said, Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe you should ask them to rethink that. Maybe that's not really the best idea. Hashem doesn't do that. And interestingly, Moshe Rabbeinu does not do that either. Moshe doesn't do that, and Hashem doesn't do that. Why not? And my suggestion is that when it comes to a truly loving relationship, the person that is the most, so to speak, invested into giving the love tries to do everything that they can to make the other person feel totally comfortable and not at all feel like they are interested in controlling them, they are interested in something for themselves. It's really all about them. And that's very good. And that's what both Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem do over here. They say, okay, look, you can go back to your tent and I'll speak to Moshe Rabbeinu and everything will be fine. Now, what happens very often in these loving relationships is that, let's say a person A asks their spouse for person B for a favor, right? We'll say the husband asks the wife for a favor and the wife just, says, okay, everything's fine. And she's not comfortable with it, or vice versa, right? The choosing to push back can automatically always be perceived as though you don't really want to do what I said, right? As soon as the person asks, they're saying, look, maybe rethink it, or look, are you sure that's what you want? Immediately, because of the nature of the closeness and the vulnerabilities involved, the other person can always feel that the person who was asked does not want to do the request. And really, that wasn't the case over here. Hashem is totally fine to do it. Moshe Rabbeinu is totally fine to do it. But the people should have done much better. The people should have done much better. And it gets confusing in a relationship, because of the blame game. When this type of conversation and then discomfort emerges, what tends to happen is that the person who was rebuffed, if they were rebuffed, automatically blames the other person on some level. They don't want to do it. They're not willing to put in the effort, or they have a different agenda, whatever it is, control, all those things. So the problem becomes that if you say yes, then the other person doesn't rethink it, and then they, in fact, will get what they want even when it's not necessarily best for them, or they could have done better. It would have been better for the Jewish people to learn Torah directly from Hashem. That's a deficit. That's a loss, right? That's a problem. On the other hand, if Moshe Rabbeinu Hashem says no, so then what happens? Then the people are going to feel like, oh, okay, so you're forcing this on us. Right? It's almost like a no-win situation. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about, right? Like no matter what you say, it's going to be the wrong thing, right? So that is the problem in a loving relationship. And what really tends to happen is very often the person who was asked for this favor, like in this case, Hashem, so to speak, or, this request, don't talk to us directly. We had the panel on alienation, which this could sound like. What tends to happen is that the person who gets what they want will still blame the other person. And they'll still say, well, we're not as close as we should be. You know, it was so much that you were speaking to me. You know, it was so intense and I couldn't handle that. And when I said I didn't want to speak to you directly, I didn't mean I never want to speak to you directly. I wanted you to come back and say to me, you know, I'll make it easier for you, right? Everybody has these games that they play, but they don't actually speak the whole story. And that's a major problem in love relationships. And that's when therapy is called for, third-party intervention is called for, to facilitate the communication of what's not being said is so critically important in a relationship. But why should the people not want to get close to Hashem with love? Like Rashi says, that Moshe was feeling that the people were not yearning desperately to get close to Hashem out of love. And the answer is because even though Hashem completely opened himself up, so to speak, right? And if you read the commentaries, the Mount Sinai experience, not only in the sentences, but in the commentaries, there's so much that's going on. God tore apart the heavens and he tore apart the below, and he showed them that everything is unified and God is one, and the whole universe became revealed to the people at Mount Sinai. Right? So there's so much that God did to facilitate the most awesome, intimate experience of all time. So why should the people not want to feel that more and to get closer to Hashem and desperately cleave to him out of love? And the answer is very simple. Because people very much want their own space, and they very much want to not be so consumed and so involved in something outside of themselves, because people tend to be selfish and people want their own, so to speak, minds, and they don't want to feel that they're so engrossed and so involved in something else, which in this case, we mean the oneness of Hashem. So it's hard to have a truly intimate relationship. And that's another thing that I'm alluding to in our title when I'm talking about learning to love. Learning to love does not only mean learning to appreciate another person and value them, learning to compliment them, learning to be vulnerable to them. It doesn't only mean that. It means learning to be permanently into the other and out of yourself, which is an extremely hard thing for people to do. To be able on a constant basis to feel what the other person might be feeling or to think about what the other person might be thinking about is a huge endeavor. Happens to be that that's much more natural for a woman than for a man. It's very possible that part of Moshe Rabbeinu's allusion to himself is that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to do that, which is why Moshe Rabbeinu never goes back to his wife. He stays permanently attached to Hashem. Whereas the people, they do go back to their relationships, so to speak, separating them and Hashem on some level, because there is not a possibility to have both the spousal relationship and the same intimacy with Hashem, which is why Moshe Rabbeinu, in fact, did never go back to his wife in order to have that permanent level of prophecy and availability to Hashem. That's just an aside, but it's really on point to what we're talking about. So when Moshe Rabbeinu says, and I felt like a female, what he's referring to is that he did not feel empowered to say to the people, look, you're making a mistake, rethink this. And he did not have that conviction to really say to them, listen, guys, I think you might be making a mistake. This is something that you should really reconsider. Now, a point that's very important for Hashem to say that, since Hashem is the subject, if Hashem would say, guys, think about it, so the people would say, oh, Hashem is forcing us. But for Moshe, who's a third party, to say that, and Moshe is seen, by the way, and referred to in the rabbis as a shadchan, right? A shoshbin is the rabbi's word. Moshe Rabbeinu is seen as the person bringing together Hashem and the Jewish people. Moshe is a third party, an interlocutor, the shadchan, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is a third party, so Moshe Rabbeinu really could say that to the people, even though he wants them to feel their own passion and love, that it should come from them, that they do want that relationship and closeness and learning of Torah directly from Hashem. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, again, like we suggested last week, is also admonishing himself that he allowed himself to not speak perhaps what he should have spoken and cause the people to rethink their position to learn directly from Hashem. So this aspect of learning to love and to speak with conviction, the Torah is directly addressing here in our parsha, and I just want to kind of frame it so that we see it clearly. Moshe Rabbeinu begins the parsha with the fact that he was rejected from going into Eretz Yisrael, and as we explained on Wednesday, because of that, the first generation does not go in, and the second generation also, because of the sin of the rock, does not themselves overcome the sin of the first generation, and they don't go into Eretz Yisrael in as miraculous a fashion as they could have, not needing to lift any weapons or wage any battles. Okay. But then Moshe Rabbeinu goes on to tell them, but don't squander the opportunity that you have now to get Eretz Yisrael. And in order for you to get Eretz Yisrael properly and to live in Eretz Yisrael correctly, what you must do is remember Mount Sinai. That's literally how he begins. The day that you stood on Mount Chorev, and you have to inform this to your children and to your grandchildren that day, and the experience that you had there. Because if you want to know what's supposed to give you the permanent conviction that your relationship with Hashem is real, and that Hashem has made himself available to you forever and ever, it is the experience of Mount Sinai. And you need to know that that is the most important thing to hold on to. Now, by the way, that's one of the six regular mitzvah, one of the six regular things that we're always supposed to recall is the experience of Mount Sinai. It appears in the Siddur at the end of the morning davening. And then Moshe Rabbeinu says, it might happen that you're going to be long in the land and you're actually going to deviate and you're going to do idolatry and you're going to be exiled. And you have to know that when that happens, you're going to be in terrible situations scattered among the nations of the world, and you're going to be serving idols. But when you seek Hashem from there and you will find him, if you search with all your heart and with all your soul, then Hashem will respond to you, will listen to your voice, and will return. And he says very clearly that what's going to cause that renaissance, that after all those devastations and exiles and time out of the land of Israel, scattered among the nations of the world, is when you recall and say to yourselves, wait a second, we've experienced all this history. Has there ever been a nation from one end of the world to the other that anything as magnificent and gigantic has happened? Have you ever heard of a nation that God spoke to them from amidst a fire like us and lived to speak about it? Or have you ever heard of a nation that God came and took them, extracted them from exile to bring them, into redemption with incredible miracles? So you began to see, and you know that God is Elohim. That is what needs to cause our spiritual renaissance. If we want to know how do we get to the point that we can seek Hashem from our exile, it's when we firmly build the conviction of the history of our people into our hearts and souls. That's how we begin the spiritual renaissance, with recalling the reality of Mount Sinai, and that at Mount Sinai, God made himself completely available to us. It was a direct face-to-face communication, and we need to know that in our hearts, that the result of all that is that God is real. If we don't have the conviction to speak that truth, we will stay in exile. If we don't have the conviction to tell everyone of our children and grandchildren that there is no God like our God, that there is no nation that ever experienced what we experienced in terms of Mount Sinai, and that God chose us, then we don't know that God is God. We don't know Hashem Hu Elohim. We don't know that. Because the only way to actually know that, instead of I hope it's true, or we have a lot of traditions, or I think, maybe there's something there, or you know what, at least it's nice and moral and good, or, it keeps the family together. That doesn't cut it at all. If we don't know it, if it's not a firm conviction that then we go proclaim and make sure that our children and grandchildren know it, we're going to be stuck in exile and we will not have a spiritual renaissance. And we all see clearly today how tragic it is, not that the world doesn't have a spiritual renaissance, but the names that you all know that I'm thinking about that are Jews are clearly far away from the spiritual renaissance. How tragic it is that their fathers and their grandparents did not firmly implant that conviction into their hearts. Because if they would have, we would be in a different geopolitical reality and landscape. We absolutely would be. Now, part of what's amazing is the way the Torah teaches this to us, because we have this whole lesson where Moshe is saying, I lost out. I'm not going into the land of Israel. You lost out because you're not going into the land of Israel as you should have, on the level that you should have, with the ease that you should have. And now I'm telling you, be careful not to squander your opportunity into Eretz Yisrael, and make sure that you firmly have this in your minds and know that if you don't, you go into exile, and the only way to get back is to have that Mount Sinai experience in your minds. The Torah keeps repeating the Mount Sinai experience, and you need to firmly build it into your heart, put it into your heart so that you actually know it. And you also need to know that the Jewish people are an imperfect people, and there might be murders or accidental murders. And the rabbis point out that the person is created, in the 6 days of creation, and he's created on the sixth day, and he transgressed the sixth commandment, which happens to be don't murder. The rabbis are saying that correlated to I am the Lord your God is to know the power of a human being. And the power of a human being, and why we take it so seriously, that even accidental murder needs such a consequence called long-term exile into a city of refuge. That's because what a human being, what a Jew is meant to accomplish is so gargantuan. We have to understand that living in Eretz Yisrael requires us to understand the incredible gargantuan impact that we are supposed to have as human beings, and therefore we have to take every life of a human being so significantly and so importantly that the land cannot be set up and inherited properly without designating those cities of refuge, because each person's life is that important. How ironic it is that we're being blamed today for not caring about human life when the opposite is true even today, but it was even more true back in the times that we inherited Eretz Yisrael. I'll never forget, probably 45 years ago, hearing my father comment at the Shabbos table that one of the first things that the rabbis would be sure to do is to figure out that so many people should not be dying in car accidents every year. They would do something drastic to make sure that that whole thing is completely turned on its head. We do need some kind of an executive order. If we can stop immigration, we should be able to do something about people dying in car accidents, whether it's speed limits or much more severe penalties, whatever it is. Something needs to be done about that, but that's because we value life so tremendously, and that's the emphasis that the Torah is making over here. And then the Torah goes in to say, these are the 10 commandments, and just know what happened was that because you were willing to not pursue this loving relationship with Hashem, that's why everything else negative happened. Because you were not actually willing to be in a constant state of immersing yourself in the words of Hashem directly as much as you could from Hashem, that's why all the exiles that we've spoken about, all the sins that we have recounted, the lower level of the people entering the land of Israel, all of that happens because we are not passionately seeking Hashem from love. And so Rashi tells us that paragraph where the people said, you talk instead of us, and Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem don't really respond, and then the people go with that Okay, but Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The only way to rectify this is very simple. The first thing you have to know is that there is no escaping God in creation. You know, the whole Tisha B'Av 3 weeks we've mentioned before, the 3 weeks tells us that we are stuck in the narrows because there is no escaping the responsibility that we have as Jews in the world. We can never get out of it, and therefore we suffer in these 3 weeks to remind us that our responsibility can never be shirked, and we always will have to face it, either willingly or with what happens to us. Okay, but in addition to that, the fact that God is everything, and that in order to properly exist in this world, we have to be always seeking to understand more and to think more about the reality of Hashem's existence and all of that truth that we learn from Hashem's existence. That's Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's what that's saying. And even though it looks like, oh, you have 7 billion people in the world, and so many of them don't know, or they don't think, or they don't recognize the truth of the Torah, whether they're monotheists or not, right? That's certainly true. They're rejecting the truth of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu says, listen, guys, it's really very simple. Love Hashem, love Hashem, and you know how you do that? By putting His words on your heart. You didn't want to talk to Hashem directly? Okay, here, you have His words. Here are His words. Implant them into your heart. Put them into your heart. Because when you do, you will be automatically connecting to Him in the deepest way possible. You teach them to your children. The rabbis tell us that kind of teaching refers to a sharpening. And the example that the rabbis give us is that if somebody wakes you in the middle of the night and they ask you your name, you know your name. If they ask you, what does it say in this week's Parsha, it has to be as automatic as that. It has to be that it's automatic. It's imprinted on your heart. Because when people love the words of other people, or they love them, like let's just say they ask you for your wife's name or your children's name, you better know that one too, right? When people are consumed with a passion, it becomes a part of them. It lives in their hearts. And so the way to actually achieve this loving relationship with Hashem, even though we chose to not have Hashem speak to us directly, is by absorbing the words of the Torah into our heart. That's literally, just by the way, you should know that is what Rashi says. What is the love? That these words are put onto your heart, because then you will completely love Hashem and you will completely follow His ways, and you won't have any of the deviation and you won't have the distancing from Him. And that is the way to love Hashem. So, learning to love Hashem means literally having His words on our heart. And then, of course, we speak those words, which is why the Torah talks about you teach them to your children, and you speak in them when you're sitting in your house, and when you're walking on the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. That is the manifestation of the love of Hashem, is to speak the words that are His words. That's literally the manifestation of it. And in order to have this spiritual renaissance, the only way to get there is to have the conviction that the words that we have are the words that He told Moshe to tell us. It's as simple as that. If you have that conviction, then you will seek Hashem wherever you are, and we will have a Mashiach coming. If you don't have that conviction and you don't speak those words, we will not. And we will be stuck in this exile until we do. So that concept of learning to love, meaning that you're trying to absorb as much as you can of the other by being involved in their thoughts and in their words, which is the way we're meant to love Hashem, and then fully integrating that into who we are, is how we go from a world where Hashem is only the God of the Jews to Hashem Echad, where the whole world will know that Hashem is one, and Hashem is the only truth and the only King. Now, it's a tall order. I don't pretend that it's not a tall order, but I think it does start with something as simple as checking in with ourselves and making sure of two things. Number one, that we have that conviction. that we don't have doubts about not only the existence of God, but the reality of Mount Sinai, and that these are the words of God. If we have doubt about that, we have big problems. If we have full internalization of that and conviction, then the litmus test is that we do speak those truths, especially to our children and grandchildren, but really to everyone. And I just want to remind you that for all the Jews that are seeking solutions to the anti-Semitism, et cetera, and so on, this is where it begins. And that's really what our friend Henry was talking about, sharing the truths of the Torah. Sharing from today is what is love. Love is giving the other person the full total space that they should choose to connect to you as much as they want, but then that person actually choosing that and not keeping the distance and not remaining, I think as Joseph posted, to some degree selfish, right? But being able to think fully and deeply all the time about the other person and about their thoughts. Sharing with them about what is rebuke, sharing with them, all the things that we've been, discussing over these last weeks. It is inspiring. It is amazing. Look at what the Jewish people are. Look at the life of every Jew. Look at what a Jew can do. Look at what the Jewish people can do. Look what's happened in these last 2 years, etc. There's so much to actually just see, but then speak about and make sure that everybody else is becoming impassioned about. That's how you create the Renaissance that will lead to the ultimate redemption that we are all really seeking. So I'm hoping that everybody really starts thinking more seriously about sharing these ideas. Somebody else actually texted me this week that they're sponsoring a Kiddush, I think in Denver, that they plan to speak about some of the shiurim. If you're sitting, we'll just conclude with this and then we'll go to questions and comments and I'll look on the chat. But if you're sitting at a table, whether it's with family, with friends, or if you're at an event and you're not inspired to share words of Torah, you're not doing it. It's not where it's at. It's very simple. Not having what to say means it's not bubbling up inside you and then coming out of you. Then you're not properly seeking that loving relationship with Hashem and not properly taking those words into your heart. But if you have what to share and that you yourself are inspired and happy, that's contagious in the best possible way. And that really does create the reality that even in the exile, you will seek Hashem, and Hashem will respond, and Hashem will save you, etc. But it's only when you do so with all your heart and soul, which does depend on learning how to love Hashem and stop being in our own worlds and stop wanting distance. No, be fully immersed in His words, go to His words. His words are what build a relationship with us and ultimately is what will cause us to want to serve Him and get close to Him from love. Let's go to questions or comments, please. I'll just look on so Ari Marinelli pointed out, forced love is the definition of abusive. Absolutely. So it makes sense that Hashem does not respond with, well, guys, really, you should want to talk to me directly. Joseph said, complete love is the opposite of selfishness. Absolutely. Now, Dr. Horowitz asked, am I implying that this must be a continuous communication of conviction? Well, yes, but not necessarily every day that you tell your children or your grandchildren that Mount Sinai is true, but that every day you're getting from the words of Torah something that you feel is important to share, a truth that is something that you do want to share with your children and grandchildren. Yes. Shinantam is also repetition, very true. And Ari, I'll read your comment after Aaron Yehuda goes, whose hand is raised.
Thank you, Rabbi. Earlier this week, I read the comment that Sinai is also the of Sina, which is the hatred of the nations. And it's so interesting, based on your message, that if we don't do what you say, then not only are we missing out on the connection, but there are negative consequences coming from the nations who, because instead of being chosen for the good, we are chosen for Lashon Hara and being despised in exile.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. It's true. We either succeed and bring everybody into the so to speak the love relationship with Hashem, or we are hated. That's true. Yes, excellent point. Ari, your point about Moshe Rabbeinu being not satisfied with being an intermediary. Do you want to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, it looks to me like, I think on the surface you would expect that Moshe Rabbeinu would feel quite honored by, okay, it's not going to be everybody that's going to have this connection with Hashem like I do. I'm going to be the intermediary, and it feels very empowering. But I think Moshe Rabbeinu, his leadership was a true leadership, and a true leader, what that the leader wants from his constituents is that they also achieve the kind of relationship with Hashem that he has, right? And so it reminds me a lot of the Rosh Hashiva's shira about that you are the smallest of the nations. That if you look at the Rashi there, it talks about humbling. It's about humility and lowering ourselves. And the way the Rosh Hashiva explains that is that we lower ourselves, and that means that we're not. It's not about our being this big, large nation that people can be swept up into our achievements, but that we empower them for their own greatness. So true leadership is inspiring others and empowering others. And if you have to be the intermediary, you're not doing it wrong. You're not doing it the right way.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, so you're taking it a step further. I was saying that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu could have said to them, "Listen, guys, rethink that." But I think you're saying that he was hoping that everything that he had done would have empowered them enough to know that they should do that.
Yeah, and he perceived in himself a certain failure, but I think it's a credit to him that he noticed that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to think about that some more. Thank you.
The proof that he's saying the right thing, because you see, when Yeshua said Eldo the Meida Misnam Bamachna, and Moshe said, "Hey, that's what I want."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very good. Shar kochacha, Gidol. Thank you. Yeah, great point.
The other thing that I thought I was really taken by is what you said about if you're sitting amongst people, you're sitting at a Shabbos meal, and you don't feel an urge to share words of Torah, that indicates that you have some work to do. It kind of reminds me of the Rambam in Hilchos Sodi Torah, that the Rambam says that the more you learn about Hashem, you become like almost lovesick, and the more the lovesick you are, you want to share it with others. I want to tell you about this love that I have for the Rabboni Shalom.
Yes. Yes. Very apt. That's correct. That's Vishinantam Levanecha. It's gotta be, really bursting out of us, I think. Anybody else? Maybe Michiel?
No.
You just went off of mute, so I just thought.
No, I was waiting till the end to ask you if you're available at 4.
Then my hope is yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you really think the kids want to listen to you middle eating? Even you
didn't say in the middle of your eating.
No, I'm not saying the middle of the kids eating.
Yes, they do.
They do, okay.
You could walk and chew gum.
I think we underestimate how much our children really do want to hear from us, provided that it's not us admonishing them. I think we greatly underestimate. They love. I learned this from my father also. There's nothing more that a child craves than the parent's attention.
From my experience, the more conversational it is, the better.
Yeah.
When I tell my kids the Divrei Torah, I ask a question first, and I leave it to the table for others to share their own ideas.
Yeah, that's definitely a good process for sure. Yeah, and it's also amazing how much we learn from that too, which is terrific.
Mm-hmm.
It also builds the relationship when they see that. Yeah. Okay, everyone. I'm wishing you all.
Shabbos, thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.